Hello, friends, and welcome back to another episode of the Liberty Weekly Podcast. I'm your host, as always, Patrick McFarlane. This one is episode 199, and the show notes may be found at libertyweekly.net/199. Just wanted to remind you all that the Liberty Weekly Podcast is also featured at the Libertarian Institute at libertarianinstitute.org, where you can find other fine libertarian content and podcasts. We have a great group of podcasters, and we also have a great group of writers over there who are churning out awesome content every single day. So for this episode, I wanted to do a little bit of a deep dive look at these talks of a global pandemic treaty. And I want you to be patient with me because these are concepts that I haven't really had a whole lot of time to explore very deeply. But today I was actually in the shower listening to Corbett Report, James Corbett, and he mentioned something that I hadn't heard about before, and it just kind of piqued my interest. So I went down the rabbit hole a little bit today to come out with this episode for you guys. All right, so I'm going to play the audio that kind of piqued my interest on this topic. This was a recent interview that James Corbett did with Michael Welch of Global Research NewsHour.
But looking ahead into 2022, what would you say is the event or news story that will hugely impact our living in this COVID age?
There are obviously a lot of wild cards at play, and one of them very well could be the effects of what we are being told is a vaccine that has been rolling out across the past year. We do not know. We do not know the health effects of that yet, and we may start seeing that in the coming months and year. So that may be a major event. It may not be. It may be something along other lines. In the biomedical framework, the biosecurity framework that I've been talking about the last couple of years, I think the next major move that will take place, and they've already started talking about, is a global pandemic treaty that the WHO is already starting negotiations about. And I think that is where we will start to see the teeth of the biosecurity state coming into view. I don't think it, like the Homeland Security state was predicated on nation state defenses and the Department of Homeland Security in the US and their counterpart institutions in each individual nation state. I think the biosecurity state will be predicated on some sort of global pandemic treaty. We can't have this chaos of people closing borders and having all these different rules. We have to harmonize all these rules and regulations and have some sort of central body for deciding when to close down a country's borders and that sort of thing. And I think that probably won't happen this year, but the negotiations will begin on that this year. The real wild card, in my estimation, and something that I'm going to be writing about in my newsletter in the very near future, is the geopolitical wild card, because I think...
All right, so yeah, you can see why that piqued my interest, was this talk about the teeth of the global biosecurity state. And one of the biggest things that first appeared to me was when I first started looking into this, just kind of looking at news stories, and there's this consensus that they seem to have manufactured, in my opinion, that the world was completely unprepared for any kind of global virus or anything like that, any kind of global pandemic. And of course, that just really piqued my interest because, of course, people like, Bill Gates and all of these shadowy figures, they've been talking about a global pandemic coming for decades now. And they've been doing all of these different programs to simulate the arrival of a global pandemic and what the response would be. And most famously, we have Event 201, which was, according to their own language, it was a 3.5-hour pandemic tabletop exercise that simulated a series of dramatic, scenario-based, facilitated discussions confronting difficult, true-to-life dilemmas associated with response to a hypothetical but scientifically plausible pandemic. 15 global business, government, and public health leaders were players in the simulation exercise that highlighted unresolved real-world policy and economic issues that could be solved with sufficient political will, financial investment, and attention now and in the future. And, they talk about all these different events that they've done to simulate a global pandemic. Similar to the center's three previous exercises, Clade X, Dark Winter, and Atlantic Storm. These are all scenarios that they've played out and gamed, simulating a global pandemic. And it seems like the consensus from the alternative media, and I think patently true if you watch You can watch all of their videos, all of it's filmed, that they spent most of the time talking about how to control the narrative and to silence dissent. And they didn't talk about actually, promoting alternative treatments or exploring alternative treatments or, increasing access to people to have this information if they wanted to try different things. No, we need a singularly focused answer to the pandemic. And that means that we have to spend all of our time controlling the narrative and, of course, putting down any kind of dissent or any kind of unrest that would happen because of the fallout from government policy, but also the fallout from deaths or, things that you would imagine would be, if it were a real pandemic, like people dying in the street and that kind of panic, access to resources, supply chain issues that came from people dying in the streets. Let me emphasize, dying in the streets, and not people questioning the existence of a pandemic. Inter alia, questioning the existence of a pandemic because they don't know anyone who's really been affected by it. Just saying. So just to frame this issue, we have this article from the New York Times. WHO members agreed to begin talks on a global pandemic treaty. The World Health Organization's member states on Wednesday took the first step toward what many governments hope will be a legally binding treaty aimed at strengthening global defenses against pandemics. A rare special session of the WHO's governing body agreed to set up an intergovernmental negotiating body that is to meet no later than March to begin negotiating an international agreement intended to ensure a more coherent and equitable response to future pandemics. But the U.S. and other countries have pushed for a weaker mechanism that would not carry legal obligations for member states. And I think that's interesting coming from the United States. I don't know exactly what the press is, if historically the United States is more resistant to calls for like global legal obligations. I'm just not that familiar with international law to know what their stance is. Usually, if this is odd for them to push back on legally binding mechanisms that would obligate the United States to take certain action. But the WHO Director General, Dr. Tedros Ghebreyesus, a strong advocate of a legally binding treaty, hailed the decision as historic, calling it a once-in-a-generation opportunity to strengthen the global health architecture to protect and promote the well-being of all people. So the decision marked just the beginning of what promises to be arduous negotiations to try to achieve consensus among the WHO's 194 member countries. The agreement calls for negotiators to deliver the results of their deliberations in May 2024. So this is, I think this is very ambitious, and that feeling is reflected in a panel that we're going to be kind of pause and playing. And this is a panel coming up in this episode from the World Health Summit, where you have different talking heads giving their opinions. And actually, they're not talking heads. They're people who are highly connected to public policy in positions of power, kind of this technocratic cast of creatures that are on this panel. But so there's a little bit of the geopolitics here. You know, the EU and Britain have pushed for months for an ambitious treaty or convention that carries legal force. They talk a bit about the Omicron variant and different travel rules and border closures because as Corbett mentioned, we can't have, this uncoordinated response of people, local people looking out for what they believe is in the best interests of the people who actually have some control over local policy. We can't have that happen. We have to have an overarching infrastructure with legally binding triggers that coordinate data sharing and policy like that. So the U.S., they pushed back on the legally binding initiative, but they did say it's a momentous step up. A momentous step. But the article says with support from Brazil and other countries, it refused to commit to anything that is legally binding and kept open the possibility of a weaker instrument. So we're actually going to be reading the opinion piece from the WHO Inspector General. And again, I apologize for his name. It's very difficult to pronounce. Dr. Tedros for short. So I'm just going to call him, his last name is Ghebreyesus. So Tedros Ghebreyesus. So he writes, what is the missing ingredient in global pandemic preparedness and response? There's emerging global consensus for a political compact to prevent future crises on the scale of the COVID-19 pandemic, writes Dr. Tedros Ghebreyesus. The COVID-19 pandemic is a lesson in humility for the world. It has shown us what devastation a novel pathogen can wreak, especially if we fail to come together in global solidarity. Says, one of the people at the forefront of what the global pandemic response has been. The health impacts of the pandemic have been traumatic and unprecedented, yada, 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 just a whole bunch of kind of scaremongery things. Equally painful has been the social and economic impact of the pandemic and the great inequities that we have seen. I'm sure that the inequities and the economic impact of the pandemic has nothing to do with the government shutting down society. I'm sure it's definitely is, definitely is the virus, not the response to the virus and the government shutting down businesses across the world. One of the biggest lessons is that we must revamp the world's collective response, he writes. This means improving how we collaborate across all sectors. This is a total society response, is what the panel said. That's what they're going for. So the global the all of society response to protect the global population from a global threat. In 2003, the SARS outbreak propelled the world to adopting what it thought would be the answer to preventing and responding to disease outbreaks of international concern, the international health regulations. So this is important because this is a large part of what they are actually talking about on this panel and as part of this global treaty, because they want the world to adhere more to the global or to the international health regulations. So he says this global playbook is still in place today. The IHR are designed to prevent, detect, and respond to infectious disease events. They advise on the introduction of safeguards to protect travelers' rights and trade. Sure. And treat personal data carefully. Sure. Okay. They contain many of the ingredients needed to keep outbreaks and pandemics in check, he writes. Even today, there is broad consensus on the critical role of the IHR and their centrality to the global architecture for pandemic preparedness and response, even if some adjustments are needed to ensure that they remain fit for purpose. So I don't know if he's manufacturing this broad consensus. He's just asserting that a broad consensus exists. And another thing, as I continue to read, this is boring, and I think it's calculated to be boring. This panel that I watched was very boring. And in fact, we'll look into it into a second. But again, it's the World Health Summit. They have 2,750 subscribers, 2,750. And their panel entitled The New Pandemic Treaty, The Bretton Woods Moment for Global Health. And yeah, that framing is very concerning. But it has 434 views, and it's months old from October. So these are very popular people who are making talking about what they want the world to look like, and they're doing it with so little views and so little public debate, it seems, about their vision for the future. So he says certain elements have held the IHR back, however, in particular the short supply of broad, high-level political commitment and global collaboration needed to fully implement their provisions for the common public good. So this is it is a look at a global response. And again, that global response is an all-of-society response. So I think that this should be very concerning for folks like you and me, and everyone, frankly, because what they're really looking to do is to create a huge treaty that would legally bind everyone that signs on to it, that would require the that would require each locality to respond to the pandemic in certain uniform ways. And I think one of the lessons that we should take from the pandemic, from the response to the pandemic rather, is that we actually have seen federalism in the United States, and we have seen kind of diversity in local response to this pandemic. And I think that's something, the vestiges of the federalist system, small f federalist system that I've talked about on my podcast, and frankly that Jeff Dice talks about a lot, is we have seen Americans voting with their feet, and we have seen people electing where they're physically located based on policies that have a broad effect on their life. And if you're lucky, you live in an area of the United States like I do that has been relatively unaffected by COVID policies. There are better places to live than where I live, and certainly we're not untouched by government malfeasance in terms of the COVID-19 response. But what this really is talking about are legal obligations that would perhaps invoke a uniform federal response in the United States, but it might also invoke uniform state response, or at least that battle would exist. And of course, there are internal safeguards, in quotes, safeguards in the United States that might help prevent a universal policy that from being implemented. However, I don't know if I really have that much faith in the judicial system. I don't know about you guys. So he says, earlier this year, dozens of world leaders reacted to this gap with a landmark call for change, proposing a global legally binding compact agreed at the highest levels of government to prevent a crisis like COVID-19 occurring again. Yikes. I too believe the time has come for such an accord between W.H.O.'s member states. The call for such an instrument, rooted in the W.H.O. Constitution, helped initiate a process now playing out within the framework of the World Health Assembly, which will meet from 29th November 2021 to December 1st, 2021 for a special session to consider the way forward for such a bold proposal. The WHO Constitution was built for this purpose. It was designed in 1948 with the knowledge that the attainment by all people of the highest possible level of health was not a job for one ministry or one sector or one institution. It also empowers WHO to engage with all relevant actors, including heads of state and non-health authorities. It enables countries to send heads of state as their representatives to the World Health Assembly and special sessions of this body, such as the upcoming one considering an agreement on pandemic preparedness and response. The consideration of a global agreement, framework, or treaty, call it what you want, on pandemic preparedness and response does not represent an either-or decision between a new accord and a stronger IHR. In fact, a global agreement that secures the highest level of commitment to ready the world for future pandemics will, in turn, provide the political muscle and motivation needed to ensure tools like the IHR are properly implemented. A strong, durable agreement will increase compliance with the letter and spirit of the IHR, renew commitment to the principles, objectives, and purposes of the WHO Constitution, and support the need for sustained investment in global health and keep people safe, because that is the most important thing ever, keeping people safe. COVID-19 has laid bare global shortcomings, including the grossly uneven distribution of vaccines, oxygen, diagnostics, and other tools on the background of fragile health systems, exacerbating already existing global inequalities. What would this instrument look like? That would be up to member states to decide, because really you and I are going to have a say. The individuals who actually live in the member states, sure, we're going to have lots of say in what this looks like. So I'm being sarcastic if you didn't pick up on that. But at its heart, this is supposed to be a commitment to sharing data, information, resources, knowledge, and tools in strengthening global, regional, and national health systems to make them ready to respond. It will embrace a One Health approach that addresses the interface between environmental, animal, and human health. It will foster improved trust and accountability, so sorely lacking in this pandemic. People just doing what they want, localities doing what they think is the best, ostensibly, for the people, but at least localities being governmental systems that are much closer to the people that they're governing over, and provide the solid foundation on which to build other mechanisms to protect global health. So he talks more and more about the mechanisms we have in place to detect, prevent, and respond to an outbreak of potential pandemic threat are inadequate, particularly in our digital world. So I'm sure this is going to be information sharing, more surveillance, more things like that. So again, he's talking this once-in-a-generation opportunity. This can be achieved through a legally binding instrument covering all facets of pandemic prevention, preparation, and response, and addresses itself to today's leaders and future generations and to adapt to a rapidly changing world. So again, what he's really talking about is recreating society. This in this panel that I've been teasing, they talk about a global, like an all of society response to the pandemic. And I think that's, and they also say that, you know, pandemics are going to be the norm in a more global society, and that this won't be the last pandemic. And so what I don't really see and what isn't really mentioned is, when are these global, like this global coordination and global power grab, is there going to be a solid definition for when these powers lapse? Like, this is kind of the same thing that we went into in Afghanistan, is that, well, we don't know what victory looks like. We don't necessarily know what the mission is. We just know that we're fighting terrorism, right? Or we're rebuilding the Afghan society, but there's no definition of when we're going to leave, or when the Afghans are going to, when the Afghan government is going to be rebuilt. It's just we're going in without a clear distinction. It's an indefinite situation. And that's what I fear about here. So let's talk a little bit about, before we get into that panel, I just want everyone to kind of know exactly what we're talking about here. So the IHR, because that's discussed at length in this panel. Again, international health regulations. So with the signing of the revised International Health Regulations, IHR, in 2005, and for those of you listening, this is the CDC website talking about global health protection and security. This is their page for the IHR. So with the signing of the revised International Health Regulations in 2005, the international community agreed to improve the detection and reporting of potential public health emergencies worldwide. IHR 2005 better addresses today's global health security concerns and are a critical part of protecting global health. The regulations require that all countries have the ability to detect, assess, report, and respond to public health events. Man, that literally word for word came just from the article that we were just talking about, that we were just reading by the Director General, Dr. Tedros. So let's see. CDC is working with countries around the globe to help meet the IHR goals. So about IHR, the basics. With trade and travel expanding on a local level, the opportunity for greater disease transmission also increases. The public health and economic impact due to infectious diseases can cause great harm to humans. Okay, propaganda. IHR is coordinated by the World Health Organization, the W.H.O, and aims to keep the world informed about public health risks and events. As an international treaty, so it is an international treaty, kind of much like the global pandemic treaty that they're talking about, it seems. The IHR is legally binding. All countries must report events of international public health importance. Countries reference IHR to determine how to prevent and control global health threats while keeping international travel and trade as open as possible. And one thing that they talk about in this panel is their concern that people in member countries aren't really following the IHR. So it seems like a critical tool that would be in place in a new global pandemic treaty would be more teeth and more compliance mechanisms for the IHR to be in place. So again, detect, assess, report, and respond. They talk a bit more about it, but you kind of get the basis for it. They go through the history. Under IHR 2005, a PHEIC is declared a public health emergency, is declared by the WHO if the situation meets 2 of 4 criteria. We've kind of seen this play out in the COVID-19 situation. So these are the elements that they consider. Is the public health impact of the event serious? Is the event unusual or unexpected? Is there a significant risk of international spread? Is there a significant risk of international travel or trade restrictions? So under this, once a WHO member country identifies an event of concern, the country must assess the public health risks in the event within 48 hours. If the event is determined to be notifiable under the IHR, the country must report the information to WHO within 24 hours. So some diseases are mandatory reporters: smallpox, polio, human influenza caused by a novel subtype, SARS. Others are cholera, pneumonic plague, pneumonia, yellow fever, viral hemorrhagic fever, West Nile fever, other things. Since IHR went into place, the 4 public health emergencies that have been declared by WHO was H1N1 swine flu, polio 2014, Ebola 2014, and Zika virus 2016. So the IHR represents an agreement between 196 countries, including all WHO member states, to work together for for global health security, rather. So if you go to About WHO, because I'm sure many of you like myself have not actually kind of broken down how this works. But WHO says who we are. Founded in 1948, WHO is the United Nations agency that connects nations, partners, and people to promote health, keep the world safe, and serve the vulnerable so everyone everywhere can attain the highest level of health. So purely altruistic motives here, just looking out for the health and safety of everyone and ensuring equality. So what we do, and again, this is the WHO's website I'm reading from right now. WHO leads global efforts to expand universal health coverage. We direct and coordinate the world's response to health emergencies, and we promote healthier lives from pregnancy care through old age. Our triple billion targets outline an ambitious plan for the world to achieve good health for all using science-based policies and programs. So they work all over the world. Let's go to their partners page and see who they have with collaboration. So they have a lot of fuzzy language about collaboration, why we collaborate, who we work with, the United Nations and multilateral organizations, governments and leaders, and experts, advisory groups, non-state actors. Let's look into that. Partnerships and special programs, and goodwill ambassadors. So let's look at non-state actors just to see here. Well, I was hoping that they would have a bit more of like who these non-state actors are, like a short list or something like that. Just kind of looking through their documents here. So it'd be really nice if they just like came out and put WHO register of non-state actors. Let's see. So they have these profiles here that I'm just kind of looking through on the fly. So I just did some searching here, and of course I found the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation as being people that interact with WHO from 2017 to 2019, 2020 to 2022, and there's annual reporting information here. I just, randomly picked a non-state actor trying to see. The WHO Executive Board admitted Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation into official relations with the WHO. So this is their collaboration plan for 2020 to 2022. The official relations are governed by the framework of engagement, yada, yada, yada. Summary of the overall collaboration. So oddly enough, this page doesn't really mention COVID-19. I just wanted to see if I could find anything on the fly, but you can go here and you can search their register of non-state actors that are officially involved. But you see, that register that they have on the World Health Organization website. So now we're kind of getting like, I just wanted to give you guys a look at these these guidelines that they have and how they're supposed to be implemented, the IHR guidelines and kind of what they're grappling with in this global response. But to talk a little bit, they had this panel that they put on, and there's a lot of really interesting nuggets, and I wanted to do a bit of a pause and play on that. Hey everyone, and welcome to the portion of the show where I tell you how you can help support this content. Your one-stop shop is libertyweekly.net/support. And once you're there, you can see all the different ways to support my content. There is a Amazon wishlist there you can check out. There's also a PayPal button, paypal.me/libertyweekly for one-time donations. There's also a Patreon button and a Subscribe Star button where you can donate on a monthly basis in exchange for the bonus content that I do offer. So go check those out. There's an archive there with actually hundreds of posts going back years, and you get all access to all those things with your donation. There's also cryptocurrency addresses there with all the addresses for the cryptocurrencies that I accept. If you don't see one there you'd like to donate, just get in touch with me. And if you want access to bonus content but you don't want to pay a monthly fee, you can go over to Odyssey, libertyweekly.net/Odyssey, ODYSEE, and you can purchase my bonus content there a la carte, and you can purchase it for LBC, which is the cryptocurrency that the website runs on. The best deal for subscribing and getting my premium content, though, is to go to Rokfin.com, Rokfin. You can, for $10 a month, get access to tons of your favorite creators. And you also get access to my premium content there as well. And there's a lot of great creators there that you can check out on the screen here. But for you listening in the audio version, Last American Vagabond, Monica Perez and Brad Binkley from the Propaganda Report, Joanne Leone from Around the Empire, Kyle Anzalone as well from the Libertarian Institute, just a whole bunch of people, Whitney Webb from Unlimited Hangout. So go check that out. One monthly subscription gets you access to all of that. And if you like my writing, I do sometimes release blog posts that don't end up on the Libertarian Institute on my Substack /Substack. So you can go check that out as well and see some of my writings for my email list. And of course, the Liberty Weekly podcast appears on the Libertarian Institute at libertarianinstitute.org, alongside other fine podcasts, Scott Horton, Pete Quinones, A Free Man Beyond the Wall, Conflicts of Interest with Kyle Anzalone, Don't Tread on Anyone with Keith Knight, my show, and also Year Zero with Tommy Salmons. So go check out those other fine podcasts and help support the Libertarian Institute, libertarianinstitute.org. Thanks, everybody, and back to the show. I will warn you, it is a little boring, but I'm sure they don't do that on purpose. Maybe they do. I'm not sure, but no, it seems like nobody really watches this. But we're gonna take a look at the pause and play. Well, maybe first we'll do exactly what the World Health Summit is. So the World Health Summit here, they did. The most recent summit, they had a panel talking about a new pandemic treaty, the Bretton Woods moment for global health, and this was their panel. But if you go into their partners, their sponsoring partners, you can see who it is. So you have, it seems like it's kind of focused in Germany. Siemens. You have the Federal Ministry of Education and Research, a German governmental entity. But you also see Pfizer and Johnson & Johnson are big partners of this World Health Summit. The Bill Melinda Gates Foundation is right here. Bayer. So you see all these kind of usual suspects here. Harvard Medical School. Yeah, so you can see the World Bank Group, So all these sponsors. So they had this panel on what a new pandemic treaty might look like. You have them doing this and talking about it in October. And then shortly thereafter, the WHO convenes a special session. And so let's take a look at how they're characterizing this whole situation. So I for those of you watching the video version, I turned the subtitles on because these are they're foreign speakers. They're not English language first speakers, so it can be a little hard to understand it at one point. But just to describe to you, at the beginning, they have a slide representing their talk. It's entitled "A New Pandemic Treaty: The Bretton Woods Moment for Global Health?" ? And they have the speakers on here, but they don't have what their credentials are. So one of the ladies that speaks quite extensively, I wrote down here, she is a legal aid to the Ministry for, she's a legal aid to like the president of the EU Council. So she's an attorney and foreign policy advisor to the president of the EU Council. And she's going to be speaking first after the moderator hands it over to her.
Explain it as well. It's an online tool that you can use to put in your questions and comments that I can then pick up with the iPad here. In the end, so the panelist. I tried to learn your name, Simona. I hope you forgive me when I don't pronounce it correctly. So Simona Gueva, almost, is a lawyer by training and foreign policy advisor to the president of the European Council, Charles Michel. Dr. Jahud Mayur, Assistant Director General for Emergency Preparedness and the International Health Regulations at the World Health Organization, which can't be with us, but you see him here. Dr. Anders Nordström, Swedish Ambassador for Global Health at the Ministry for Foreign Affairs and Head Secretariat of the IPPPR. You will talk about and maybe tell us a little bit more about that. And Professor Jean-Luc Bourgi, Adjunct Professor of International Law at the Graduate Institute of International and Development Study and Director of the Joint LLM, Global Health Law and Governance between the Graduate Institute and Georgetown Law School. Okay.
So you can see the pedigree of the guests. I mean, these aren't just anybody. And of course, this is the World Health, this is this event that they had going on here is the World Health Summit. So
it is. So let's just start with our discussion. Simona, first question for you. Why did Charles Michel advocate for an international pandemic treaty?
Thanks, Mike. Thank you all. And maybe before I start, I should say I'm quite flattered that Bjorn said welcome to the family because I'm actually a crisis manager. So I have no background in health. So if there was no crisis, I wouldn't be here with you. And I think also if there was no crisis, President Charles Michel wouldn't have advocated for a pandemic treaty. He proposed this idea last year about this time in November at the Paris Peace Forum, because after 6 months of pandemic, we saw that there was very little push or political will for a multilateral response to this crisis. And in his very personal conviction, which I share strongly, this is the only way you can handle such a global challenge. And not only that, to take it further, this is of the responsibility of heads of state and government at the highest level. This is not the responsibility for a health ministry here or for a health organization there or for an agency, God knows where. So he very strongly feels, and we have been working exactly towards that end, to have this led at the level of heads of state of government to set very clear rules, very clear expectations on how to manage a crisis, but also how to prevent future ones. I mean, I don't know if this will be the last of all pandemics, but I certainly hope if we have another one, we will be much better prepared. I don't think our citizens will forgive us if we're not, and I don't think we'll have any credibility. Now, to go against...
Okay, just a note there. I don't think that our citizens will forgive us, and I don't think that we'll have any credibility if we're not more prepared. Well, you got something coming, lady.
What you've all said of no presentations and stuff. I have abused the niceness of our hosts to show you one or two things, which I think just to illustrate what we're talking about. If we can put them on, please. So this panel is entitled The Bretton Woods Moment. And as some of you might have done the same as me, what was Bretton Woods again? I know it ended in the 70s, but Bretton Woods is the financial system that was set up after the Second World War. The idea was to have, let's say, common system of our currencies after everything was inflated and nothing worked. Now, this is from the World Bank. You see that we are apparently in a Bretton Woods moment. We are in the biggest recession since the Second World War. And due to a health crisis, not a financial crisis, we are more than double of the recession that was due to the financial crisis in 2009. But it gets worse. I don't know if I can change to the next. Could you put the next one? I'm not managing. In the financial crisis, nobody died, at least as far as I know. Here we've got some extra bad situation. I would have given you the figures from the Second World War, but they're very, very controversial. So in order not to offend anyone, we're on the First World War where we had 20 million deaths over 4 years or a bit more. Now we're at almost 5 million deaths in not even 2 years. So this is a ratio which is very, very concerning. And then you take the wounded, there are 21 million wounded. We don't really talk about wounded in a health crisis, but we have just diagnosed what long COVID is. We don't know how long it will take. We don't know what impact it would have. And when you look at the cases that we have, 243 million cases worldwide today, it is very, very scary to us what this can become. So I will not show you the rest of the slides. I have another two, but I just wanted to illustrate why I think Bretton Woods is the best name you could have had for this panel. And I think there is no better time than to take real action at the highest possible level, and there is no time for it. So that's from me. Thanks, Mike.
So first off, her numbers don't really, I don't know, there's a typo in her slide. This is supposed to be like an international conference for, shaping the future of society. And in the top right-hand corner, she has, for World War I, 20 million deaths, 21 million wounded. And she says her numbers say 2014 to 2018. Well, World War I took place from 1914 to 1918. So that's a typo, I guess, on her side. But the COVID-19 crisis, she says, well, we have 5 million deaths, and that's taken place in only 2 years. But then she says that in World War I, we had 20 million deaths taking place over 4 years. And she says we have 5 million deaths in 2 years, as if that's supposed to be something like comparable to World War I or something that's more terrifying than World War I. And then again, I don't think I need to make too much hay with picking at the inflated COVID numbers and, deaths with COVID as opposed to deaths of COVID. And, maybe they're not taking into account all the deaths that have been caused by government policy in ways that we can't even measure, that aren't measured. But then she has this, we have this long haul COVID, and we don't know how many millions of people are going to be suffering from long haul COVID. Where, how convenient if the medical procedure that they're mandating is actually what the real cause of long haul COVID is, how convenient of a narrative of long haul COVID to say, oh, well, all those people that are getting myocarditis or having complications from COVID, right? Yeah, well, that's from COVID. That's long haul COVID. That's not, something else, maybe a medical procedure that we mandated. But I digress. All right, so skipping forward a little bit here, she asks the next panelist a question, and he doesn't really answer the question. So then she asks it again, and you'll see here. But this is talking about what would actually be different were we to have this big treaty, because remember, the IHR is a legally binding treaty that took place in 2005. So how would this be different? And maybe we can get a look at what the mechanisms are so we know from our perspective what is this going to look like in terms of are they going to require that all member countries and signatories have vaccine passports? Are they going to, say that all member countries have to have a vaccine mandate? So let's take a look at what his response is to get a better picture. And he doesn't completely answer it, but it's important for the panel here to take a look at what he says.
Thank you very much. I think that's the big hope, but let me ask you maybe again, what would be the difference from the status quo in a world where we have the international health regulations?
I think the international health regulation, they have defined scope, and the scope of the international health regulation is first to ask countries to have core capacities to detect and respond to outbreaks. Second, to share information. Third, to prevent travel spread of disease. And when the IHR was discussed and designed, and Gianluca was part of this process, was designed to look to mid or small outbreak like the SARS that we saw. But definitely, the IHR doesn't cover many areas that are needed in large-scale pandemic like this one. And this is what I tried to mention in the beginning. But yet, the member state working group who are now discussing the future of pandemic preparedness and response, they agreed collectively that is not either or. And they agreed that any future pandemic preparedness and response should be based on first, strengthening the implementation of IHR, including better compliance and some targeted amendment. Second, to strengthen the existing framework and not to duplicate and create new one to avoid fragmentation, and discussing the treaty or instrument to cover areas who cannot be covered under the existing mechanism.
Okay, thank you very much.
All right, so here's another little bit where they talk about what the rules actually might look like. And there's a lot of talk in this panel about, making sure that we can respond quickly and share information and all that kind of good things, but making sure that people are obligated to do these things. And they talk a bit more about it here.
That would be my answer.
Thank you. I think that leads us to the content. What should we expect or think of writing into it? Anders, maybe you can reflect on what are the ground rules?
Thank you. I think exactly a convention or treaty should be about the rules. And let me also say what it should not be about. And I think basically, as I hinted before, a convention would be extremely useful sort of from the end to end. What is needed in terms of preparedness, what is needed in terms of information sharing and the alarm, and what is needed in terms of the response, the whole from the beginning to the end if something would happen again. That's basically where a conventional framework convention would be very useful. But set the rules in terms of who needs to do what are rights and obligations in this. I think it would be interesting also, it would be important to think about national level and regional level, because a lot is happening now within the European Union in terms of now getting organized. But how is that also going to connect to the global level? I'm not sure. So I think that is something that needs to be thought of so that we get a comprehensive international system. So for me, it's quite simple, but let me also say what it should not be.
Please.
Because I think there are issues that a treaty will not be able to deal with. First one is WHO itself. There's a need for reforms of WHO. And I think WHO needs to be sharper, more focused, increase quality of the work. And the critical issue then when it comes to WHO is reforming the financing. The treaty will not solve that issue, just to be clear. WHO needs substantive reforms in terms of focusing the work, but also increasing the quality. And the answer to that is basically reforming the financing. The second one is then also, if we talk about money, that is to mobilize big money. In some way, big for us today, 10, 15 billion US dollars per year. But if you look at what this pandemic has cost us this far, it's extremely small money. That kind of money to invest in preparedness, but also to be possible to be available if something happened again, that a treaty can't deal with. We need to find a different financial modality to deal with that. That was one of the recommendations of the panel. The panel also said very clearly that we need political leadership that goes beyond health, that goes beyond WHO at the highest level, taking a multi-sectoral approach. The panel recommending then to establish a Global Health Threats Council by the United Nations General Assembly at the heads of state level. That is, again, that kind of political leadership looking across the whole systems beyond the rules. A political body, again, a treaty can't deal with that. And the final one is then what we are writing to now is about the redistribution of vaccines. A convention, a treaty could potentially set some of the rules here for better equity and a better sort of way of working. But the fact of doing the work, quote unquote, which basically COVAX, Act A, Gavi is doing today, a convention could of course not do. So you still need to think through what should actually the operational aspects of the system look like for the future. And the panel recommended more of a thorough evaluation to see what we can learn from Act A, what kind of end-to-end platform do we need for the future? And that, I think, is still to be concluded on. So message that a convention that covers both the preparedness, the alarm system, and the response, rules of the game, but then there's a number of other aspects. So a reform agenda that goes beyond a convention, I think is extremely important. And my final word is, as I said, I'm quite concerned about the political situation right now. This is not, I was saying this yesterday in another debate, this is not rocket science. Just do it. I mean, reform the financing of WHO, take a decision on the convention, establish a new financing modality, establish a Global Health Threats Council, make sure that we have a different Act A for the future. It's simple. It's simple compared to what we spoke about the climate agenda. That's difficult. That's big. This is, in some way, technical, simple health matters. That shouldn't be rocket science for politicians just to agree on. But that is not what we're seeing right now.
Okay, so the Global Health Threats Council, maybe that is something like akin to what James Corbett was talking about, specifically as being the teeth, as having a body that's going to decide and make decisions about what specific member states will have to do in certain situations. And I think the implications of that are pretty terrifying, is ceding over an even larger amount of our sovereignty on very, very crucial, critical questions. And I think that the hubris of this guy, Anders, just trying to read his name here. He's the ministry. He's works at the Ministry for Foreign Affairs in Sweden. But the hubris that he has to be like, well, this isn't rocket science. We just have to do it. Hand over your authority, give us the money, give us the funding, and that's just what you have to do. And of course, none of us, no locals, people with local experience on local matters, we don't really have a say. We just have to cede ourselves, cede our authority and power to, I guess another level would be our politicians, our local politicians, but then international politicians. And I think that the implications of this should be pretty clear to everyone. So I'm going to be putting links in the show notes page for all of you to kind of assess this for yourself. But I just wanted to put out an article or an episode to kind of explain to people, what is being considered, who is considering it, and what that will look like and what the time frame will be, and how alarmed should we be for the future. And I think it is alarming. I'd like to see more details on exactly what they're proposing, because once we had the IHR and we saw what the IHR kind of looked like with COVID-19, and they're talking about problems, and from their experience, the problems that the IHR had, from their position, from their perspective, I'm sure that they are identifying issues with it. Lack of a coordinated response, having people like a delayed coordinated response, member countries not really knowing what they should be doing, when they should be doing it, not taking the response seriously. From their perspective, they want to be the iron fist that coordinates this universal response. But also the hubris of these central planners thinking that they can control a virus, thinking that their singular unified response dictated by them under color of law invoking international agreements, thinking that this is the answer to a global health situation. We have epidemiologists and people who aren't real doctors. They're not actually treating patients. They're quote unquote public health experts that are dictating what the universal response should be. And this is just central planning writ large, as we know from libertarian Misesian libertarians with human action, knowing that the anarchy of the market produces better solutions and responses. Well, what you're trying to do is mass produce a response. You're trying to fit every single shaped peg into a round hole or into a star-shaped hole or something like that. That's not and of course, with the caveat that I'm not a doctor, I'm not an epidemiologist, but I think that the libertarian, the anarchy of the market, this response, this decentralized response of people dealing with what's in front of them right away, that's not even being considered by these panels. They're taking for granted that the only way to deal with this is a one-size-fits-all solution that has to be dictated from the top under color of law, under a treaty that obligates 194 countries in the world to respond the same exact way. And it's their hubris thinking that they can control something natural like a virus. And of course, all the debate about engineered bioweapon, all that stuff, lab leak, gain of function aside, even if we're legitimately talking about a real natural a virus that just comes about, I don't know if there's much that we can do aside from a decentralized response of doctors treating their own patients, sharing what works in their own situation, and getting rid of this idea that we can quarantine away a virus. And maybe that's just my editorializing or my lack of knowledge about epidemics, but I don't know, and someone enlighten me if I'm wrong, but I don't know that quarantining has actually ever really effectively worked in a contagion, kind of like this situation. And by quarantining, I really mean closing borders and stopping international travel. I guess my anecdotal knowledge is just of Venice during the Black Death, where they would send people to a certain island. I think at some point you just combat the virus with procedures that are working from treating individual patients, and you don't try to artificially limit borders. And I guess I would make the argument that all these shutdowns and all these quarantine orders and things like that have had a larger detrimental effect on the economy than the virus ever would have. And so you're getting that response is that we have a hammer as the WHO, and we're going to hit the hammer being quarantines, closing off countries' borders, forcing people to share data with each other, and coordinating these centrally planned responses. I just don't think that works, just from my perspective as a libertarian, as an attorney, armchair economist kind of person. But again, one of the people on this panel is an attorney, so maybe my opinion should carry some weight. So again, I'll direct everyone to libertyweekly.net/199. I'd encourage everyone to watch this panel for themselves. Go to the WHO website, go to the CDC website where they say exactly what the IHR is. The WHO, browse through, who they're affiliated with as non-state actors, and come up with your own conclusion about what you think about these things. Should we be concerned about this new pandemic treaty? I think we should be concerned about it. I think the implications are kind of scary, and especially ceding over our sovereignty as a nation. And you know how I feel about that whole concept. But if we are to have political units, they need to be as small as possible, and ceding over political sovereignty from one smaller entity to a larger entity is not one that I advocate for. So, all right, well, that does it for me, everybody. libertyweekly.net/199, Libertarian Institute at libertarianinstitute.org. And we'll catch y'all next time. Thanks. Peace.